Caroline Crawford's hands trembled as she stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Cody, Wyoming, clutching her worn carpet bag like it was the only solid thing left in her rapidly changing world. The year was 1887, and she had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she had never met, a cowboy named Kenneth Freeman, who owned a cattle ranch somewhere beyond the rugged Main Street that stretched before her like an uncertain future. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, so different from the gentle New England climate she had known all her 22 years. Everything here seemed bigger, harsher, more real somehow. The mountains rose in the distance like ancient sentinels, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. Caroline wiped the dust from her face with a handkerchief that had once been white but was now the color of the long journey west. "Miss Crawford." A deep voice made her turn, and her breath caught in her throat. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of the summer sky. He removed his worn Stetson hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. There was something kind in his weathered face, something that made her racing heart slow just a fraction. "I am Caroline Crawford," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kenneth Freeman, madam. I am pleased to finally meet you in person." He offered a slight smile, and she noticed the way it softened the hard lines around his mouth. "I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," she admitted, "but I survived it." He reached for her bag, and she let him take it, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. Her legs felt unsteady, her dress was covered in trail dust, and she could feel grit in her hair despite the bonnet she had worn. This was not how she had imagined their first meeting during all those nights lying awake in Boston, reading and rereading his carefully written letters by candlelight. "I have a wagon waiting," Kenneth said, gesturing toward the end of the street where a sturdy buckboard stood hitched to two patient horses. "The ranch is about an hour outside of town. I thought we might stop at the hotel first, let you rest and freshen up. We can have the ceremony tomorrow if that suits you." Caroline nodded gratefully. The idea of having a night to compose herself before becoming this man's wife was a mercy she had not expected. In his letters, Kenneth had been formal but kind, never pushing, never demanding. She had agreed to marry him out of desperation, more than anything else. After her father's death and the revelation that he had left nothing but debts, she had few options. Her aunt had shown her the advertisement in the newspaper with barely concealed relief at having a solution to the burden Caroline had become. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That is very considerate." As they walked toward the wagon, Caroline was acutely aware of the curious stares from the townspeople. A woman sweeping the porch of the general store paused to watch them pass. Two men outside the saloon whispered to each other. She felt like a curiosity, which she supposed she was. How many mail-order brides came through Cody in a year? How many of them worked out? Kenneth helped her into the wagon with gentle hands, and she settled onto the hard wooden seat. The town of Cody was small but seemed prosperous enough, with well-maintained buildings and busy storefronts. She could see a church steeple rising above the other structures, a schoolhouse at the edge of town, and what looked like a doctor's office with a painted sign swinging in the breeze. The hotel was a two-story building with a neat porch and lace curtains in the windows. Kenneth secured a room for her and carried her bag upstairs while the proprietress, a plump woman with kind eyes, showed her the way. "I will return in the morning around 9 o'clock, if that is acceptable," Kenneth said at her door. "That will give us time to see the preacher before noon." "Yes, that would be fine." Caroline hesitated, then added, "Thank you for being so understanding, Mr. Freeman. Kenneth, please, and you are welcome, Caroline." He put his hat back on and nodded respectfully before heading back down the stairs. Alone in the small but clean room, Caroline finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed. She stared at the ceiling, fighting back tears. What had she done? She had agreed to marry a stranger and move to a place as foreign to her as the moon. She thought of her father, of the comfortable life they had once had before his bad investments, and worse, luck had stripped it all away. She thought of the auction where their furniture and her mother's jewelry had been sold to pay creditors. She thought of her aunt's sharp words about being a burden and needing to make her own way. That night, Caroline barely slept. She kept thinking about the ceremony tomorrow, about becoming Kenneth's wife, about all the ways she could fail at this new life. She knew nothing about ranching, nothing about this harsh country, nothing about being the kind of wife a cowboy would need. What if she disappointed him? What if she could not adapt? What if he regretted sending for her? The morning arrived too quickly. Caroline washed as best she could with the basin of water provided, then dressed in her best gown, a simple blue cotton dress that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned up her honey-colored hair and tried to calm her racing thoughts. In the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a pale, frightened young woman staring back at her. Kenneth arrived promptly at 9, and she noticed he had made an effort as well. He wore clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a string tie. His boots were polished and he smelled faintly of shaving soap. "You look very lovely," he said, and there was such sincerity in his voice that she felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." They walked together to the church, a small white building with a simple cross on the steeple. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, was a gray-haired man with a booming voice that seemed too large for his slight frame. He had them stand before the altar while he performed a simple ceremony. There were 2 witnesses. Townspeople Kenneth must have asked to help, and the whole thing was over in less than 20 minutes. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Matthews announced with a smile. Kenneth hesitated, looking at Caroline with a question in his eyes. She gave a small nod, and he leaned down to brush his lips gently against hers. It was brief and chaste, but she felt the warmth of it spread through her chest. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Freeman," the preacher said, shaking Kenneth's hand and patting Caroline's shoulder kindly. They signed the marriage certificate, and suddenly Caroline was a married woman, bound to this man by law and by God. The reality of it made her head spin. Kenneth took her to lunch at a small restaurant where they sat across from each other at a table covered with a red checked cloth. Caroline picked at her food, too nervous to eat much, while Kenneth watched her with concern. "Are you feeling unwell?" he asked gently. "Just nervous," she admitted. "This is all so new and strange." "I understand. It is a big change." He set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Caroline, I want you to know that I do not expect you to be perfect. I know this life is different from what you knew in Boston. I will help you learn what you need to know, and we will figure things out together." His words were kind, but they did not quite reach the fear that had taken root in her heart. She managed a smile and changed the subject, asking him about the ranch. Kenneth's face lit up as he described the land he had built his life on. He had 200 acres of good grazing land, a small herd of cattle, several horses, and a house he had built himself over the course of 3 years. He spoke of the mountains and the streams, the hard work and the satisfaction of making something from nothing. "It sounds wonderful," Caroline said, and she meant it, even as her stomach churned with anxiety about whether she could live up to the life he was describing. After lunch, they collected her belongings from the hotel and loaded them into the wagon. As they drove out of Cody, Caroline watched the town disappear behind them and tried to imagine this vast country as home. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. Rolling hills gave way to flatlands dotted with sagebrush and wildflowers. In the distance, the mountains rose like a wall between earth and sky. The air smelled of dust and grass, and something indefinable that she supposed was simply the West itself. Kenneth pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a particular rock formation that marked the boundary of his land. A creek where the water ran clear and cold even in summer. A stand of cottonwood trees where he had once sheltered from a thunderstorm. Finally, they crested a rise, and there it was. Kenneth's ranch spread out in a valley below them. The house was larger than she had expected, a sturdy two-story structure with a covered porch that ran the length of the front. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and various outbuildings she could not identify from this distance. "It is not fancy," Kenneth said, almost apologetically, "but it is solid. The roof does not leak and the stove works well." "It looks like a real home," Caroline said, and she meant it. There was something appealing about the simple, honest look of the place. As they drew closer, a dog came running out to meet them, barking enthusiastically. Kenneth laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "That is Duke. He is supposed to be a guard dog, but mostly he just wants attention." The dog, a large tan creature of indeterminate breed, jumped up beside the wagon, tail wagging furiously. Caroline could not help but smile at his enthusiasm. Kenneth helped her down from the wagon, and Duke immediately came over to investigate her, sniffing her skirts and looking up at her with hopeful brown eyes. "Hello, Duke," she said softly, reaching out to pat his head. His tail wagged even harder, and she felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. Kenneth carried her bag to the house, holding the door open for her. The interior was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's home. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area, with a large stone fireplace on one wall and a black cast iron stove in the corner. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was clean. "The bedroom is upstairs," Kenneth said, then cleared his throat. "I thought you might prefer your own space for now, so I have been sleeping in the small room. The larger room is yours until you feel comfortable with other arrangements." Caroline felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been dreading this moment, the expectation that she would share a bed with this man she barely knew. That he was giving her time and space was a gift she had not anticipated. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "That is very kind. I want you to be comfortable here, Caroline. I did not bring you all this way to make you unhappy." He set her bag down near the stairs. "Let me show you around, and then I need to check on the stock. You can rest or explore or whatever you would like." He showed her the bedroom, which was indeed spacious and had a large bed with a colorful quilt, a wardrobe, and a washstand. The window looked out over the valley, and she could see for miles. "I will let you settle in," Kenneth said. "There is cold beef and bread in the pantry if you get hungry. I will be back before dark to make supper." After he left, Caroline unpacked her few belongings slowly, hanging her dresses in the wardrobe and placing her personal items on the washstand. She had a daguerreotype of her parents, a few books, and some small mementos from her old life. Looking at them now, arranged in this strange new room, she felt the gulf between her past and present like a physical ache. She went to the window and watched Kenneth working in the corral with one of the horses. He moved with easy confidence, his body adapted to the physical demands of this life. She felt inadequate in comparison. What skills did she have that would be useful here? She could read and write and do needlework. She knew some basic cooking and housekeeping, but nothing like what would be required on a working ranch. Over the next few weeks, Caroline tried her best to adapt to her new life. She cooked meals, though they were sometimes burned or underseasoned. She attempted to keep the house clean, fighting a losing battle against the ever-present dust. She tried to learn about the ranch work, but everything seemed complicated and dangerous. Kenneth was patient with her, always kind, never critical even when she ruined a meal or forgot to close the chicken coop properly. But his patience only made her feel worse. She could see that he worked from dawn until well after dark, and she felt like she was not contributing anything of value. She was supposed to be a help to him, a partner, but instead she felt like another burden. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Caroline was attempting to make bread. She had made it dozens of times in Boston, but this time something went wrong. The dough would not rise properly, and when she finally baked it, the loaves came out dense and hard as rocks. She was standing at the kitchen table, staring at the failed bread with tears streaming down her face when Kenneth came in for lunch. Caroline. He was at her side immediately, concern written across his face. "What is wrong?" "Everything," she burst out. "I cannot do anything right. I burn the food or make it poorly. I do not know how to help with the ranch work. I do not know anything useful. You brought me here to be your wife, to be a help to you, and I am failing at everything." Kenneth gently took the bread knife from her hand and set it aside. Then he cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, tilting it up so she had to look at him. "Caroline, listen to me. You could never fail me. Ever. But I cannot even make bread properly," she sobbed. "You work so hard, and I cannot even provide you with a decent meal. Do you know how many loaves of bread I burned when I first started cooking for myself?" Kenneth asked gently. "Dozens. And I did not care because I was learning. That is what you are doing too. You are learning a new way of life in a new place, and that takes time. But you are so patient with me, and I am not giving you anything in return." "That is not true." Kenneth wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "You make this house feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep. I look forward to coming inside now instead of dreading another night alone. You talk to me about things beyond cattle and weather. You smile at Duke and make him happy. You are learning every day, getting stronger and more capable. That matters. You are just being kind." "No, I am being honest." He hesitated, then continued softly. "Caroline, when I sent for a mail-order bride, I was not looking for a ranch hand or a perfect housekeeper. I was looking for a companion, someone to share this life with. You are already doing that just by being here, just by trying." "But I want to be useful," she insisted. "I want to contribute. Then let me teach you, not because you are failing, but because you want to learn. There is a difference." He pulled her into a gentle embrace, and she let herself lean against his solid warmth. "You could never fail me, Caroline. The only way you could disappoint me is if you gave up on yourself." His words touched something deep inside her. She realized that she had been so focused on meeting some imagined standard that she had not been seeing the progress she was actually making. She had learned to cook on the temperamental stove. She had learned to gather eggs without getting pecked. She had learned to tell the horses apart and which ones were gentle enough for her to approach. These were not small things. "Will you really teach me?" she asked, pulling back to look up at him. "Even the ranch work, if that is what you want, yes. But Caroline, you do not have to do everything. We are partners. We each have different strengths, and that is all right." "I want to learn," she said firmly. "I want to understand this life you have built." From that day forward, something changed between them. Kenneth began teaching her in earnest, not just how to survive, but how to thrive in this harsh but beautiful country. He showed her how to ride, starting with the most gentle mare and teaching her the basics in the corral before they ventured out onto the open range. Caroline discovered that she had a natural affinity for the horses. They responded to her gentle voice and patient handling. Within a few weeks, she was riding confidently, and Kenneth began taking her with him when he checked on the cattle. She learned to recognize the signs of illness in the livestock, how to read the weather in the clouds gathering over the mountains, how to tell good grazing land from poor. Kenneth taught her to shoot, starting with tin cans lined up on fence posts until she could reliably hit her target. She learned to rope, though she was never as good at it as Kenneth, and how to mend tack and harness. In turn, Caroline began teaching Kenneth some of the things she knew. She introduced him to books, reading aloud in the evenings while he mended equipment or worked on carving small wooden figures. She taught him some of the refinements of cooking she had learned from her mother, how to make a basic meal special with the right seasonings. She even convinced him to let her order some flower seeds from a catalog, and together they planted a small garden beside the house. As summer gave way to fall, the landscape transformed around them. The grass turned golden, and the cottonwood trees along the creek blazed yellow in the sunlight. The air grew crisp, especially in the mornings, and Kenneth began talking about preparing for winter. Caroline found that she was no longer afraid of failing. She still made mistakes, of course. She left a gate open once, and they spent half a day rounding up wandering cattle. She misjudged the temperature of the oven and burned a perfectly good roast. But these mishaps no longer felt like evidence of her inadequacy. They were simply part of learning, part of life. And somewhere along the way, without quite realizing when it happened, she fell in love with her husband. It was not a sudden realization, but a gradual awakening, like the sun rising slowly over the mountains. She noticed it in small moments. The way her heart lifted when she saw him riding up to the house at the end of the day. The way she found herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, admiring the strength in his movements and the kindness in his face. The way his rare smiles made her feel warm all over. One evening in late October, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Caroline was wrapped in a shawl against the cooling air, and Kenneth was whittling a small wooden horse for the daughter of a neighboring rancher. "Winter will be here soon," Kenneth said. "We will need to bring the cattle down from the high pastures. Will you teach me how to help?" Caroline asked. Kenneth looked at her with surprise and pleasure. "It is hard work, long days in the saddle. But yes, if you want to help, I would appreciate it." "I want to," she said firmly. "This is my ranch too now. I want to be a real part of it. You already are." Kenneth set down his carving and reached for her hand. "Caroline, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I know this was not the life you expected, but I hope you have found some contentment here." "More than contentment," she said softly, surprising herself with her boldness. "Kenneth, I need to tell you something. When I first came here, I was terrified. I thought I would fail at being your wife, fail at this new life. But you showed me that trying was enough, that I did not have to be perfect. And in doing that, you gave me something I had not expected. You gave me a real home, not just a place to live, but somewhere I belong. And you gave me your kindness and your patience and your faith in me. I have come to care for you very deeply." Kenneth's eyes were bright in the fading light. "Caroline, I started falling in love with you the day I saw you step off that stagecoach looking so brave and so scared at the same time. Every day since, I have loved you more. I did not want to push you or make you feel obligated, but if you are saying what I think you are saying—" "I am saying that I love you," Caroline interrupted. "I love you, Kenneth Freeman, and I would like to be your wife in every way if you still want that." In answer, Kenneth pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Not the brief, chaste kiss of their wedding day, but a real kiss. Deep and passionate and full of all the feelings they had been holding back. Caroline melted into him, her hands coming up to wind around his neck as she kissed him back with equal fervor. That night, Caroline moved her belongings into Kenneth's room, and they became husband and wife in truth. Kenneth was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Caroline felt truly home for the first time since leaving Boston. The next few weeks were a revelation. Caroline had not realized how much she had been holding herself apart, protecting herself against potential rejection or disappointment. Now that those barriers were down, she felt free to fully embrace her new life. She worked alongside Kenneth to bring the cattle down from the high country, spending long days in the saddle despite the cold and the exhaustion. She learned to think like a rancher, to plan for the winter and the spring, to see the land not just as scenery, but as a living thing that required care and respect. She also began to make friends in the community. There were not many women nearby, but those who were there welcomed her warmly once they saw she was willing to work hard and be neighborly. Martha Perkins, whose husband ran the neighboring ranch to the east, became a particular friend. She was a weathered woman of 40 with 4 grown sons and a wealth of practical knowledge about frontier living. "You are doing well," Martha told Caroline one day when she had come to visit. "Kenneth looks happier than I have seen him in years. And you have got color in your cheeks and strength in your arms. You will make it through your first winter just fine." The winter was indeed harsh. Snow piled up in drifts higher than Caroline's head, and the temperature dropped so low that water left outside froze solid in minutes. But the house was tight and warm, and Kenneth had stockpiled plenty of firewood and supplies. They spent the long dark evenings reading, talking, and making plans for the spring. Caroline discovered that she was pregnant in late January. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited to be sure before telling Kenneth. When she finally shared the news over breakfast one morning, his face transformed with joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Caroline asked, though she could see that he was. Happy does not begin to cover it. Kenneth came around the table to pull her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Caroline. A home, love, and now a child. I am the most fortunate man alive." "I am the fortunate one," she countered. "You gave me a chance when I had nowhere else to go. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You showed me that I was stronger than I knew." "We are both fortunate then," Kenneth said, kissing her forehead. "And our child will be fortunate to have you as a mother." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Caroline continued to do the lighter ranch work, feeding the chickens and horses, helping with meals for the ranch hands Kenneth hired on in the spring. Martha Perkins checked on her regularly and shared advice from her own experiences. As her belly grew round, Caroline found herself thinking often about her parents. She wished they could see her now, happy and settled and looking forward to bringing new life into the world. She wished her father could know that his daughter had found a good man and a good life, even if it was not the life either of them had imagined. In late May, as the mountains shed their snow and wildflowers carpeted the valley in waves of color, Caroline went into labor. Martha came to help, along with Dr. Harrison, who had ridden out from Cody despite the distance. Kenneth paced outside, too nervous to be still, while Duke sat loyally beside him. The labor was long and difficult, but Caroline drew on the strength she had built over the past year. She thought about riding through snowstorms, about learning to rope a running calf, about all the times she had pushed through fear and exhaustion to accomplish something she had thought impossible. If she could do all that, she could do this too. Just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold, Caroline gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Martha placed the squalling infant in her arms, Caroline felt a love so powerful it took her breath away. And when Kenneth came into the room, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered cheeks as he looked at his wife and son, she knew that she had found exactly where she belonged. "What should we name him?" Kenneth asked, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. I was thinking about my father, Caroline said. His name was Charles. Would you mind? Charles Freeman, Kenneth said, testing the name. It sounds strong, I like it. They named him Charles Crawford Freeman, honoring both her past and their present. The baby had Kenneth's dark hair and Caroline's blue eyes, and from the moment he was born, he had his father wrapped completely around his tiny finger. The summer passed in a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days, but also moments of pure joy. Caroline learned to manage the house and the baby, finding reserves of energy she had not known she possessed. Kenneth was a devoted father, singing to little Charlie in his deep voice and walking the floor with him when he fussed at night. One afternoon in August, Caroline was hanging laundry while Charlie slept in a basket in the shade of the porch. Kenneth came riding up earlier than expected, and there was something in his expression that made her pause. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No, nothing wrong, but I have some news." Kenneth dismounted and came to stand beside her. "Tom Peterson stopped by while I was checking the north fence. He wants to sell his ranch and move to California. He offered me first chance at buying it. What did you tell him?" "That I needed to talk to you first." Kenneth took her hand. "His land adjoins ours, and it is good grazing territory. If we bought it, we could nearly double our herd. But it would mean taking on debt and working even harder for a few years. I will not do it if you do not think it is a good idea." Caroline thought about the woman she had been just over a year ago, stepping off the stagecoach in Cody with nothing but fear and uncertainty. That woman would never have imagined being consulted on a major business decision like this. But she was not that woman anymore. "How much does he want for it?" she asked. They spent the next hour discussing the details, weighing the risks and benefits. Caroline asked questions about the land, the condition of the buildings, the water sources. She calculated costs and potential profits in the careful handwriting she had learned as a girl. "I think we should do it," she said finally. "It will be hard, but this ranch is our future. It is Charlie's future. If we have the opportunity to make it stronger, we should take it." Kenneth looked at her with such pride and love that she felt her heart swell. "When did you become such a good businesswoman?" "When I married a rancher," she said, smiling. "You have taught me well." They bought the Peterson ranch, and the next year was indeed hard work. But they were in it together, partners in every sense of the word. They hired 2 permanent ranch hands, young men from town who were eager to learn the trade. Caroline managed the household and the accounts while also caring for Charlie and helping with the ranch work when she could. By the time Charlie was walking and getting into everything, the expanded ranch was thriving. They had weathered a hard winter, a dry spring, and various setbacks, but they had come through it stronger. Caroline had gone from being a frightened mail-order bride to a confident ranch wife who could ride, rope, shoot, and manage the business side of the operation with equal skill. One evening in the fall of 1889, 2 years after Caroline had first arrived in Wyoming, she and Kenneth were sitting on the porch watching Charlie play with Duke in the yard. The sun was setting behind the mountains, and the air had the crisp edge that promised winter was coming again. "Do you ever miss Boston?" Kenneth asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Caroline considered the question seriously. "I miss some things. I miss my parents, though they have been gone for years now. I miss the ocean, though I barely remember what it looks like. But no, I do not miss the life I had there. This is my home now, truly. I am glad." Kenneth reached for her hand, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Do you remember what you told me that day I was crying over the bread?" Caroline asked. "That you could never fail me." "You were right, but not in the way I thought at the time. I realize now that the reason I could never fail you is because you never set me up to fail. You gave me room to learn and grow. You believed in me even when I did not believe in myself. You loved me before I had done anything to earn it. That made all the difference. Kenneth pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sage and home. I love you, Caroline Freeman. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you too. And I thank God every day for that advertisement in the newspaper, as frightened as I was when I saw it. It brought me to you. Charlie toddled over to them, demanding to be picked up, and Kenneth scooped him up with a laugh. The little boy settled between them, yawning sleepily as the last light faded from the sky. Over the next few years, their family and their ranch continued to grow. Caroline gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter they named Sarah in 1890, and another son they named James in 1892. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the region. They added more land, built a larger barn, and installed one of the new windmills that were becoming popular for pumping water. Caroline became known throughout the area as a woman of capability and kindness. She helped other new brides adjust to frontier life, sharing the lessons she had learned. She served on the committee to build a new schoolhouse in Cody and made sure her children learned to read and write as well as ride and rope. Kenneth thrived as a husband and father. He was patient with his children, teaching them about the land and the animals with the same gentle guidance he had shown Caroline. He treated his wife as a true partner, respecting her opinions and relying on her judgment. They had their share of hardships over the years. There were harsh winters, dry summers, illnesses, and accidents. They lost cattle to disease and predators. Kenneth broke his arm in a fall from a horse, and Caroline had a difficult recovery after James's birth. But they faced each challenge together, their love and respect for each other deepening with each passing year. In the summer of 1895, the town of Cody celebrated its official incorporation. The whole region turned out for the festivities, and Caroline stood with Kenneth and their children, watching the parade down Main Street. She thought about the frightened young woman who had arrived here 8 years ago with nothing but a carpet bag and a head full of fears. "What are you thinking about?" Kenneth asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "About how much has changed," Caroline said. "About how blessed I am." "We are both blessed," Kenneth corrected. "Charlie, hold your sister's hand. James, stay close." Their eldest son, now 7 years old, carefully took 5-year-old Sarah's hand while 3-year-old James clung to Caroline's skirts. They looked like a proper frontier family, sun-browned and healthy, wearing their Sunday best for the celebration. Martha Perkins came over to greet them, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "Look at you all, the picture of prosperity. Caroline, I remember when you first arrived, all pale and scared. Look at you now." "I had good teachers," Caroline said warmly, squeezing Martha's hand. "You had the grit to learn," Martha countered. "That is not something anyone can teach." As the celebration continued around them, with music and dancing and speeches from local dignitaries, Caroline felt a profound sense of contentment. She had come west expecting to fail, to be a burden, to disappoint. Instead, she had found love, purpose, and a strength she had not known she possessed. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Kenneth and Caroline sat on their porch as they had so many times before. The stars were brilliant in the clear Wyoming sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. "You remember our wedding night?" Caroline asked. "How awkward we were, how little we knew each other." "I remember being terrified I would say or do the wrong thing," Kenneth admitted. "I wanted so badly for you to be happy here, but I did not know how to make that happen. You made it happen by being yourself, by being honest and kind and patient, by showing me that marriage could be a partnership, not a master and servant arrangement. You taught me just as much, Kenneth said. You showed me that strength comes in many forms. You brought culture and learning and beauty into my life. You made this house a home and gave me children I adore. You became the true heart of this ranch. Caroline turned to look at him, this man who had offered her a chance when she had nowhere else to turn. The years had added lines to his face and some silver to his hair, but his eyes still held the same kindness that had made her feel safe that first day in Cody. You told me once that I could never fail you, she said softly. I want you to know the same is true in reverse. Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, you could never fail me either. We are in this together always. Kenneth leaned over to kiss her, a sweet, lingering kiss that still had the power to make her heart race after all these years. Always, he agreed. In the years that followed, the Freeman Ranch continued to flourish. Charlie grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's love of the land and his mother's quick mind. He was already talking about expanding into raising horses in addition to cattle. Sarah proved to be a natural with animals and showed an artistic talent, sketching the landscape and wildlife in notebooks Caroline bought her from the general store. James was still young but showed signs of inheriting his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. Caroline and Kenneth watched their children grow with pride, knowing they were raising a generation that understood the value of hard work, the importance of kindness, and the strength that came from family. They taught their children to read and write, to ride and shoot, to respect the land and the animals in their care. The ranch itself became something of a model in the region. Kenneth was known for his innovative approaches to cattle management and his fair treatment of his ranch hands. Caroline ran the household and the business side of the operation with such skill that other ranchers sought her advice. Together, they had built something lasting, something that would provide for their children and grandchildren. In 1898, Caroline stood in the kitchen of their home, preparing Sunday dinner while Sarah helped her roll out pie dough. Through the window, she could see Kenneth teaching the boys to properly care for their saddles and tack. Duke, now graying around the muzzle, dozed in a patch of sunlight on the porch. "Mama, do you ever wish you had stayed in Boston?" Sarah asked suddenly. Caroline paused in her work, considering how to answer. "I think about my parents sometimes, and I am sad they never got to see this life I have built. But no, I do not wish I had stayed. Everything I love is here. Your father, you children, this ranch. Wyoming is my home. Tell me again about the day you arrived," Sarah begged. She loved hearing stories about her mother's journey west. "I was so frightened," Caroline began, smiling at the memory. "I stepped off that stagecoach covered in dust, carrying a carpetbag that held everything I owned, and I had no idea what to expect. Then I saw your father, and even though I did not know him yet, something in his face made me feel like maybe things would be all right." "And were they?" Sarah asked, even though she knew the answer. "They were better than all right. They were wonderful, though it took me a while to see it. I was so afraid of failing, of not being good enough for this life. But your father taught me that trying was enough, that love and partnership meant supporting each other through the learning and growing. I want to have a love like that someday," Sarah said wistfully. "You will," Caroline assured her, "when the time is right and you find the right person. But there is no rush. Enjoy being young. Enjoy learning and growing and discovering who you are." Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the dishes were washed, Caroline found Kenneth in his small office, going over accounts in the lamplight. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "What is this for?" he asked, covering her hands with his own. for being you, for loving me, for building this life with me." Caroline kissed the top of his head. "I was just thinking today about how different my life might have been if I had not seen that advertisement, if I had not taken that chance." "I think about that too sometimes," Kenneth admitted. "I almost did not place that advertisement. I told myself I was fine alone, that I did not need anyone. Thank God I changed my mind." "We have been so blessed," Caroline said. "3 beautiful children, a successful ranch, a community we are part of." "When I think about where I started, how lost and scared I was." "You were never lost," Kenneth interrupted gently. "You were just finding your way to where you belonged. And you were never weak, even when you felt like you were. You had the courage to travel across the country to marry a stranger." "That took incredible bravery." "I did not feel brave. The best kind of courage is the kind you have when you are scared but do it anyway." Kenneth turned in his chair to pull her onto his lap. "You did that every day when you first arrived. You got up every morning and tried again, even when you felt like you were failing. That is real strength." Caroline rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I could not have done it without you. You made me feel safe enough to try." "We did it together," Kenneth corrected. "That is what marriage is supposed to be. 2 people making each other stronger, supporting each other, building something together that neither could build alone." They sat that way for a long time, comfortable in the silence, comfortable with each other. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. These were the sounds of home, as familiar now as the streets of Boston had once been. The next Sunday, the Freeman family attended church in Cody as they did every week. The town had grown significantly over the years, with new businesses and homes spreading out from the original Main Street. The church had been enlarged to accommodate the growing congregation, and a new bell tower rose above the buildings, visible for miles. After the service, people gathered outside to talk and catch up on news. Caroline chatted with Martha Perkins and some of the other ranch wives while Kenneth discussed cattle prices with the other men. The children ran around the churchyard with their friends, making the most of their freedom before the ride home. Reverend Matthews, who had performed Caroline and Kenneth's wedding ceremony over a decade ago, came over to greet them. His hair was whiter now and he walked with a slight stoop, but his smile was as warm as ever. "Fine family you have there, Mr. and Mrs. Freeman," he said. "Those children are a credit to you both." "Thank you, Reverend," Caroline said. "They keep us busy, that is for certain." "I was just thinking the other day about your wedding," the Reverend continued. "You both looked so uncertain, like you were stepping off a cliff together. Look at you now. One of the strongest marriages I know, built on respect and true partnership." "We were uncertain," Kenneth admitted. "But we figured it out together." "That is the secret, is it not?" Reverend Matthews said. "Marriage is not about starting out perfect. It is about growing together, learning together, becoming something stronger than either person was alone. You two exemplify that." As they rode home later that afternoon, Caroline thought about the Reverend's words. She and Kenneth had grown together, shaped by the challenges they had faced and the joys they had shared. She was not the same woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in 1887, and Kenneth was not quite the same man who had greeted her that day. They had changed each other, always for the better. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Spring brought calving and branding. Summer meant long days of work under the relentless sun. Fall was roundup time, and winter required careful management of resources and livestock. Each season brought its own challenges and rewards, and the Freeman family met them all with determination and unity. Charlie reached his 18th birthday in 1896 and began taking on more responsibility for the ranch operations. He had his father's steady temperament and his mother's head for business, and Kenneth began gradually turning over more control to his eldest son. Sarah continued to develop her artistic talents while also proving herself a capable horsewoman and ranch hand. Young James showed promise as well, eager to learn everything his father and brother could teach him. In the spring of 1900, as the new century dawned, Caroline stood on the porch looking out over the ranch that had been just a dream when she first arrived. The original house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. The barn was larger, the corrals more numerous. They had a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a smokehouse, a proper chicken coop, and a root cellar. The garden she had started had grown into a substantial plot that provided vegetables all summer and canned goods for the winter. Kenneth came to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. "New century, new opportunities," he said. "Charlie wants to talk to us tonight about his ideas for the horse breeding program." "He has good instincts," Caroline said. "He will do well." "He learned from the best," Kenneth said, "both his parents." Caroline leaned into her husband, still feeling that warm glow of love and contentment that had only deepened over the years. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day when we had lunch after the wedding? I told you the ranch sounded wonderful." "I remember. You looked terrified." "I was, but I was also hopeful, though I barely let myself admit it. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, I could make a life here. I hoped you would be kind, which you were. I hoped I would not fail too badly." "And I told you that you could never fail me," Kenneth reminded her. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. You have exceeded every hope I had when I sent that advertisement to the Boston newspaper. You have been an incredible wife, mother, and partner. You took a chance on a rough cowboy and a hard land, and you made both better by your presence." "We made each other better," Caroline corrected. "That is what love does. It does not demand perfection. It encourages growth. It provides safety to fail and try again. You taught me that, Kenneth Freeman, and it was the most valuable lesson of my life." That evening, true to Kenneth's word, Charlie presented his plan for expanding into horse breeding. He had researched bloodlines and markets, had ideas about which stallions to acquire and how to develop a breeding program that would complement rather than compete with the cattle operation. Caroline and Kenneth listened carefully, asked questions, and offered suggestions based on their years of experience. By the time the family meeting ended, they had agreed to move forward with Charlie's plan, with him taking the lead on that aspect of the ranch business. It was a new chapter for the Freeman Ranch, and Caroline felt proud of how her son had grown into a thoughtful, ambitious young man. Later that night, lying in bed beside Kenneth, Caroline thought about all the chapters of her life. The childhood in Boston that seemed like another lifetime. The desperate period after her father's death. The decision to become a mail-order bride. The terror of that first day in Cody. The slow building of confidence and competence. The realization that she had fallen in love with her husband. The births of her children. All the daily moments of joy and struggle that had woven together to create the tapestry of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Kenneth asked sleepily. "About how grateful I am. About how much I love you. About how this life that frightened me so much at first has become everything I could have hoped for and more." Kenneth rolled over to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek in the darkness. "I am grateful too. For you, for our children, for every day we have had together. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Caroline. And you are mine," she whispered. "You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You told me I could never fail you, and in doing so, you gave me the freedom to try and to grow without fear. That changed everything." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, as they had done for thousands of nights before, secure in their love and their partnership. The early 1900s brought changes to Wyoming and to the West in general. The frontier was closing, civilization was creeping in, and the old wild days were fading into memory. But the Freeman Ranch continued to thrive, adapting to changing times while holding on to the values that had always guided them. Charlie married in 1903, bringing his bride Mary to live on the ranch. Caroline welcomed her new daughter-in-law warmly, remembering how she had felt as a nervous bride in a strange land. She helped Mary adjust to ranch life just as Martha Perkins and others had helped her years before, passing on the knowledge and support to the next generation. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go to college, a rare opportunity for a woman in that era. But Caroline and Kenneth supported her ambition, proud of their daughter's intelligence and determination. They helped her apply to schools and prepared for her departure with mixed emotions. James, growing into a sturdy young man, showed every sign of being a natural rancher like his father and brother. He had a way with animals and the land, and he loved the work in a deep, uncomplicated way that reminded Caroline of Kenneth. In 1905, Caroline and Kenneth celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary. They had a small party at the ranch with family and close friends. Martha Perkins, now well into her 60s but still sharp as ever, raised a glass of punch and a toast. To Caroline and Kenneth Freeman, proof that mail-order marriages can work out just fine when the people involved have sense, kindness, and a willingness to work together. You two have built something lasting, and that is to be celebrated. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Caroline looked around at the gathered faces, people who had become like family over the years, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Later, when the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Caroline and Kenneth walked down to the creek that ran through their property. It was a warm summer evening and fireflies danced in the grass. They sat on the bank, listening to the water gurgle over the stones, just being together in the comfortable silence of long marriage. 18 years, Kenneth said. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was waiting at the stage station, nervous as a schoolboy, wondering what you would be like. Were you disappointed when you saw me? Caroline asked. How could I be disappointed when you were so beautiful? But more than that, I saw determination in your eyes. Fear, yes, but also courage. I knew right then that you were going to be just fine. I did not know it, Caroline admitted. I felt like I was drowning for those first few months. Everything was so hard and so different. I was convinced I would fail. But you did not. You never did. Because you would not let me, Caroline said simply. You caught me every time I started to fall. You believed in me until I could believe in myself. That made all the difference. Kenneth took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. We saved each other, I think. I was so lonely before you came. I did not even realize how lonely until you were here and the house was not empty anymore. We filled it up pretty well, Caroline said with a laugh, thinking of their 3 children and now Charlie's wife. Sometimes I miss the quiet, but mostly I am glad for the noise and chaos. It is the sound of life being lived, Kenneth agreed. The sound of family. They sat by the creek until the stars came out, talking about their children and their plans, reminiscing about the past and dreaming about the future. These quiet moments together, even after so many years, were still precious to both of them. The years continued their steady march forward. Sarah went off to college in 1906, sending excited letters home about her classes and the new world opening up to her. Charlie and Mary had their first child in 1907, a boy they named Kenneth after his grandfather. Caroline held her first grandchild and felt the circle of life completing itself in a beautiful way. James began courting a neighboring rancher's daughter in 1908, a sensible girl named Emma who was not afraid of hard work. The courtship was sweet and old-fashioned, reminiscent of the slower pace of an earlier era, even as the 20th century raced forward with automobiles and airplanes and electric lights. Through all the changes, Caroline and Kenneth remained the steady center of their family. They worked side by side on the ranch, made decisions together, supported their children's ambitions, and loved each other with a depth that had only grown over the decades. In the summer of 1910, Caroline turned 45 years old. Kenneth organized a surprise party for her, inviting friends and family from all over the region. When Caroline walked into the yard and saw everyone gathered there, she burst into tears of joy. "I cannot believe you did this," she told Kenneth, laughing through her tears. "You deserve to be celebrated," he said simply. "You are an amazing woman, Caroline Freeman. You came here 23 years ago with nothing but courage, and you built an incredible life. You raised wonderful children. You helped build a successful ranch. You made this community better. You made me better. That deserves recognition." The party was a wonderful affair, filled with food and music and laughter. People shared stories about Caroline, about her kindness and her strength, about the times she had helped them or taught them or simply been a friend when they needed one. She heard herself described as capable, compassionate, determined, and brave. It was strange and wonderful to hear how others saw her. As the sun set and the party wound down, Caroline found herself standing apart from the crowd for a moment, just taking it all in. Martha Perkins joined her, moving a bit slower now but still present and sharp. "You did good, girl," Martha said. "That scared little thing who got off the stage all those years ago turned into quite a woman." "I had help," Caroline said. "You helped me. Kenneth believed in me. The whole community welcomed me eventually." "We helped, but you did the work," Martha said firmly. "You could have given up and gone back east. You could have stayed scared and never tried, but you did not. You grabbed onto this life with both hands and made it yours. That was all you." Caroline hugged the older woman, feeling the weight of truth in her words. She had done the work. Yes, Kenneth had supported her and loved her and made her feel safe enough to try. But she had been the one to get up every morning and face her fears. She had been the one to learn new skills and push past her limits. She had been the one to choose courage over comfort again and again. That night, lying in bed beside Kenneth, Caroline felt a profound sense of peace. She had lived a good life. She had loved and been loved. She had raised children who would carry on after her. She had built something lasting with her husband, a partnership and a legacy that would endure. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Kenneth asked, still awake beside her. "For everything. For bringing me here. For loving me. For telling me I could never fail you. Those words changed my life." "You changed mine," Kenneth said. "Finding you was the best thing I ever did." "Finding each other," Caroline corrected. "We found each other." The years rolled on, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Sarah graduated from college in 1911 and shocked everyone by becoming a teacher, one of the few women in Wyoming with a college education. She taught at the school in Cody, passing on her love of learning to a new generation. James married Emma in 1912, and they settled on a portion of the ranch, building their own house and starting their own family. Charlie and Mary had 2 more children, filling the ranch with the sound of young voices and laughter. Kenneth and Caroline gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning more control over to their sons while remaining involved in the major decisions. They had time now to simply enjoy each other's company, to take rides across the land they loved, to sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sun set behind the mountains. In 1915, Caroline and Kenneth celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary. It was a quiet celebration, just family, but it was perfect. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, and Caroline looked at all of them with wonder. From her and Kenneth, all these lives had sprung. It was humbling and amazing. "What a legacy we have built," Kenneth said, echoing her thoughts. "The best legacy," Caroline agreed. "Not just the ranch or the material things, but the values we have passed on. Hard work, kindness, courage, love. Those are the things that will endure." As they stood together, surrounded by family, Caroline thought back to that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Cody 28 years before. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, more than all right. She wished she could tell her that the fear would fade and be replaced by confidence, that the stranger she was about to marry would become the love of her life, that the harsh land she was so afraid of would become home. But then again, maybe that young woman needed to go through those fears and struggles. Maybe that was what had forged her into the person she became. The fear of failure had driven her to try harder, to push herself, to grow beyond what she thought were her limits. And Kenneth's gentle assurance that she could never fail him had given her the safety net she needed to take those risks. "What are you thinking about?" Kenneth asked, knowing her well enough to recognize when she was lost in thought. "About how everything worked out exactly as it was supposed to," Caroline said. "About how grateful I am for every moment, even the hard ones. Even those first few months when you were so scared," Kenneth teased gently. "Especially those," Caroline said seriously. "Because that is when I learned who I really was. That is when I discovered I was stronger than I knew. And that is when I started falling in love with you, even though I did not realize it at the time." Kenneth pulled her close, and she went willingly into his arms, as comfortable there after nearly 3 decades as she had been nervous that first time. "I love you, Caroline Freeman. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day that you answered my advertisement." "I love you too, Kenneth Freeman. You told me I could never fail you, and you were right. Not because I never made mistakes, but because you never judged me for them. You gave me the space to learn and grow and become who I was meant to be. That was the greatest gift you could have given me." They stood together, watching their family, grateful for the life they had built together. The ranch would continue after them, passed down to their children and grandchildren. But more than that, the love and partnership they had created would continue as well. A model for what marriage could be when two people truly committed to supporting and cherishing each other. As the sun set that evening, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Caroline felt complete. She had come west as a mail-order bride, frightened and uncertain, convinced she would fail. Instead, she had found love, purpose, home, and a strength she never knew she possessed. And it had all started with a cowboy who believed in her, who told her she could never fail him, and who kept that promise every single day of their life together. That belief, that love, that partnership had made all the difference. It had transformed a frightened young woman into a confident rancher's wife, a devoted mother, a beloved grandmother, and a pillar of her community. Caroline Freeman had not just survived the Wild West. She had thrived in it, building a legacy of love and strength that would endure for generations. And every bit of it had started with the courage to step off a stagecoach in Cody, Wyoming, in 1887, and the wisdom to accept the love and support of a good man who saw her potential, even when she could not see it herself. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Caroline and Kenneth walked hand in hand back to their house, ready for whatever the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that together they could face anything. They had proven it over and over again for nearly 30 years, and they would continue to prove it for however many years they had left. The mail-order bride and the cowboy had found their happily ever after, not because their life was perfect or easy, but because they had chosen each other, believed in each other, and built something beautiful together. And that, Caroline thought as Kenneth opened the door for her, and she stepped into the warm, lamp-lit house full of family and love, was the best ending she could have ever imagined.